The following podcast may be explicit. Shedcast presents Adventures from the Shed, a tabletop RPG podcast. You can find us online at adventuresfromtheshed.com.
Welcome to another Sidebar episode of Adventures from the Shed. In this episode, Mickie, JJ, and Joe share their views on the roles of both players and the GM in developing a living, interactive world with a content-rich environment. Enjoy the podcast.
Hi, and welcome to Adventures from the Shed for a special Sidebar podcast today. I'm Joe. I'm here with Mickie and JJ, and we're going to talk a little bit about adventure creation and content within adventures. We're getting ready to start our own adventure in a campaign in the world of Dungeon World. It's going to be a fantasy campaign, and part of the purpose of this sidebar is to gather ideas from the players and find out what it is we want to put in it, and then everyone can be the judge of how well I did. With that, I'll turn it over to Mickie here to say hi.
Hello to all the beautiful people out there. Hi, everyone.
Both of
you.
Yes.
Please subscribe, give us comments, rate us, tell us how we're doing.
And find us at adventuresfromtheshed.com.
AdventuresFromTheShed.com is the happening place to be.
It is.
You can.
I need affirmation.
You need affirmation. You need to do cookies.
I need cookies.
I want a pat on the head as well.
I don't have a button for +1 pat on head.
Oh,
We'll get that, though.
do we have thumbs up?
Well, there's the like button that has a thumbs up, right?
Can we have a poke? Can we have it so you can poke individual people?
We don't have a poke.
We need beaver pelts. All right, that's
We
enough.
do need beaver pelts. And that's JJ contributing. Say hi.
Hello, this is JJ here, and we will be talking about adventure content today, and I have lots to talk about, so let's see how this rolls.
And although this is going to be released later, it is December 12th. I got my Dungeon Master Guide on December 9th, just like Amazon said I would. And we have that on the table here, so there might be oohs and ahs as we're looking at this book during the evening.
It's very pretty.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, the Dungeon World book as well, that's a huge one, especially for our podcast. But let's kick it off. Let's talk about, to start, the beginning of the adventure. For those listening, myself, I've mostly been a game master, a dungeon master. I think JJ has had a similar experience. We've both played, but not as often. Mickie, however, has just been a player in the games. So we have multiple perspectives here. Or by multiple, I guess I mean two.
Yeah, two sides of the coin. There's really only two sides to the coin, so...
So when, Mickie, when you start an adventure, what is your preferred method of starting? Is it something like learning each character as you go along and then finding out how they're linked? Or do you like the stereotypical, you're all starting in a tavern, you all know each other, and some guy wants you to help them?
I do not like the second option, although I don't really see a way of doing it any other way when you've got a group of people that you bring together for a couple of sessions. The ideal setting for me would be one where the characters come together organically, and as you go along your merry path, you kind of build into this storyline that intertwines each of the characters in the game. To me, that's the most fun, because then I get to meet the characters, get to know them, I get to know the players a little bit better in that scenario versus, all of a sudden you wake up and you're in a room somewhere with 5 people you don't know.
In a tavern, specifically, drinking
Well,
mead.
Right. And it happens in real life, but we won't go there right now.
Do you have an example of the start of a game that you enjoyed?
Ooh, I can't think of one offhand. I can think of ones where I didn't enjoy the start.
The starter
and
set?
The starter set was... It was an isolated event, that couldn't be helped.
We had a great group of people to play, so it was a lot of fun regardless of the start.
Correct.
But it was one of those, you all start together. Right.
I think we had one campaign where it was like my character was off camping by herself, and like a group just happened to come along and kind of saved her from some bandits or whatever who were attacking her. unbeknownst to them, she could have handled herself.
Was that one shot I ran?
Yeah, there was like a one shot that you
so
ran.
So it was Kevin and Kat?
Yeah, and, you know...
So how many people with the same first letter?
Kevin, Kat, and Mickie.
And Mickie.
And that was neat. Because
KKK.
and we were...
Nice.
Don't go there.
I didn't.
But we were playing with a group of, you know, novice players. We were all novice players, and we were all looking to JJ as, you know, the DM and the ruler of this world. That was a nice start because in that sense, I think that was a good intro to some novice players just to get more of a flavor for the game versus getting railroaded during like an encounter session. You know?
Fair enough.
Was that in D&D 4th edition?
It was D&D.
It was 4th edition, yeah. I was just trying to give them a taste to see if they would like it. And I tried to keep I came up with an adventure on the fly on the top of my head off of a book I read, and I just tried to kind of incorporate the elements. It was a little bit R.A. Salvatore, a little bit WoW.
Cool.
It just kind of worked out. You know, we had the Frostmourne from the Lich King, and
Cool.
It was good times.
it worked.
When you draw on the resources you know, you're able to provide better information for the players.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more in-depth the information, the more real the world seems.
Absolutely.
Now, the conversation we're having is, do we like a scripted start and a scripted conclusion?
Yeah, specifically, Mickie mentioned before we started, that whole railroad idea. It's a common theme.
So when I'm doing a one-shot, or if I'm doing what I think is going to be like maybe a month or 2 months, as the DM, prefer doing the scripted start. Simply because trying to get everyone together is like herding cats.
Now, let me interrupt you for a second. When you say like a month long, how many hours of play are you saying? And I use that reference because, of course, we're releasing
24
in 1
to
hour.
32 hours
Okay.
of actual play set, like every Saturday, 8 hours.
Okay.
Something like that.
We're hardcore players.
That's a lot.
Right?
Yeah, that's a substantial amount,
It is.
considering that an hour podcast, we've released about 15 hours so far over 4 months.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking about that, I need a scripted start in order to get the players together, because at least the players I play with, are very experienced, very old school. They like to make these incredibly in-depth characters, but none of them have the same goals at all. And so in order to get them on the same track and to get into the adventure, and then we can explore the other goals, I had to get them into a cohesive whole first. And the only way I can do that is a scripted start. The best alternative to that I've found is when I can get all the players ahead of time to create their characters together. Have a backstory starting with
my
them already
raucous
merged.
laughter as I consider the possibilities of that actually happening.
And that's...
But even with a scripted start, there's good ways and bad ways. And I've experienced both. I've experienced some, you know, quote-unquote railroading at the beginning where the characters come together and it's scripted start, but it's still kind of organic. And I've experienced others where all of a sudden you're kidnapped in the middle of the night and you're taken to some strange room.
So there is that one, which that's a hard, you know, when you're kidnapped in the middle of the night, you wake up and you're surrounded by people you don't know. Like, that's so boring and cliche. The adventure I had you guys do the one time was you were all in an area to make your fortune, and you all happened to meet up at the bounty board because they were trying to clear this vast wilderness so that it could be habited. So they were looking at it and they're like, ooh, giants are worth this much. Well, we can't take off a giant by ourselves, so maybe we team up.
Yeah.
And it just
that
happened because you guys were all willing to work together. You guys had goals that were matching. So, but there's some people who just don't get that hint sometimes, I swear.
You got to beat them over the head with it.
So let me take a little stab at this one. One of the things that I like to do, and this is something that you were saying, JJ, in that when you first get your players together, one of the things I'll address, and it goes along with this, although it's kind of outside of what I originally intended here, when you get the players together, one of the things I need to say when we start, and I think I've said this in a previous podcast, was the players need to agree that in order for a long-running adventure, the characters need to be cooperative. There is no other choice. I like to say conflict, not combat. Mm-hmm. The players, it's awesome to have conflict between the characters. When Mickey's character, regardless of which one it is, if there's a wizard in the group, she says, fucking wizards. Exactly. So that conflict between those characters is essential to entertainment as well as fun within the game. But when it comes to blows, when it comes to I want to shoot the wizard in the knee, I say we need to step back. So the first start is make sure you understand your characters need to be cooperative for this game to last. And once we can get that ground rule set, it becomes a lot easier for the players to then understand their characters need to talk to each other. You know, that is then become essential. So even if it's a scripted start and everyone's in the tavern together, maybe they're going to clink mugs together rather than start saying, who the hell is this guy sitting next to me, right? And they know they need to be cooperative there. And I'll step it to the next section I won't talk about here. When we say that, all right, so now we have all our characters together, whether it's scripted or some background that we already have. When you're talking about an adventure that's going to span multiple sessions, close to a campaign, if not several one-shots essentially, does it need to start small, in your own opinion? Does it need to start small and then work up to big? An example I have up here is, is your first adventure, you need to go get the rats out of the merchant's cellar, and then by the end of the campaign, you're saving the castle from the red dragon. Does it need to start so small and work up big? And I know some of it's going to depend on the system you're playing, whether you start at level 1 and end up at 20, or where the players sit within the hierarchy of the world. But JJ, how do you feel the adventure has to progress? Does it need to start that small?
I kind of like it when it starts out small. I like the randomness that can happen at first level can go toward a lot to helping you build your character. Like, if you're the barbarian and you had the most hit points at level 1, but you're always throwing yourself in, harm's way, and you're always the first one to go down, level 1, 2, and 3, then the rest of the party starts calling you Nancy because
you go into a rage when someone steps on your toe.
So it helps build the character, it helps build the backstory. I like the starting small thing. I don't really think that, at least in some of the settings, that Dungeon World I know lends itself to starting anywhere you want. You can start big, you can start small. D&D can also do that, but you have to be almost like in a war setting maybe, so that you have NPCs to help you achieve those huge goals in the beginning.
I agree. I like when it starts small and builds, not just, everything that you stated, but also it helps me as a player kind of get into the character and, test it out, feel it out, figure out its quirks, her quirks usually, and also the quirks of all the other players. It helps build camaraderie amongst the team when you take down small targets and then you figure out each other's tactics and how each of the characters work. And then by the end of it, you're like a well-oiled machine, and you can take on that dragon, no problem.
Right. You find out who's in it for the money, the loot. You find out who's in it for the tactics, and you find out who's in it for the exploration, and you start to take advantage of those. Now, we say start small, and I use the example of clear the rats out of the merchant cellar. Small can also be defeating goblins, and those goblins, however, might be attacking a village, and you could actually save a whole village. That could seem like a nice big thing. How does that strike you as like a starting thing? Is it important to save someone or help someone? And not necessarily just starting, but early on in an adventure?
Intrinsically, why do we play this game? Because we want to play heroes. I think that's why I play. You know, I get to be a hero for a couple hours once a week.
Usually pretty badass.
And pretty badass most of the time, right? So how in real life I never get to do that, you know? I never get to
slap people around.
I don't get to slap people around at work. I don't get to swing a quarterstaff and crack people on the head. So I mean, I love that. I love that I can put on, or I can enter this world where my character saves a village, saves a town, and becomes like, you know, the hero of Fondalen. Or Fandolin, however you want to say it.
Where they have pecan pie.
And with the starting small thing, it helps with so we defeated the goblins. Like, stepping from our world, our real world, to defeating goblins, that's a fairly easy logical jump. You know, stepping from our world to defeating a dragon the first time around, that's much more mythological, much more gamey, so to speak. But if you start off with the goblins, and you can start immersing yourself in that world. Okay, so now we got the goblins. Now we're going after the hobgoblins and the orcs, and you start immersing yourself into the monster, into the lore, and you build yourself up to that storyline. You can see yourself, you know, killing that dragon now.
Mm-hmm.
So that immersion is very useful then. That progression from something that is
so we go from something mild,
right,
yeah,
to
it all goes towards building the world for the character and immersing yourself in that world. And the more details and the more adventures you have, the more interactions, the more battles, the more discussion, the more real it becomes. At least for me,
yeah.
I can see the movie in my head as I play better.
Oh, and I like that reference, because one of the things I like to do when I run the game is to set the scene. Where are you in the scene? And sometimes I even use a reference of the camera. Where's the camera pointed in the scene, and how does that play out? And I think that character immersion is very important. It's something I strive for personally, that if you're fighting the goblins to save the city, or just clearing rats out of the merchant cellar, that merchant has something in it for you, or the city is going to be thankful for what you've done. Hopefully, by the end of whatever happens, your name is known somewhere. Mm-hmm. If nothing else, that merchant knows that your character has helped, and you get that discount at his shop, or you get the free food when you show up. If you save the town, maybe they name the fountain in the middle of the town after you. There has to be something that connects your character to the event when I play, and that's kind of what I look for. And I think that helps, and we'll go to that highlighted point there that we brought up before we started, the actual description of the world and the non-player characters. So the things that the GM actually controls, that if they are described enough to help paint that picture, to set the scene, to show where the camera is pointing, what's happening. So if you happen to be approaching through the forest at sunset and you're going from west to east, the shadows from the trees fall ahead of you. Your own shadow is on the ground. There's the bright orange sunlight from behind you. The leaves are falling. You set that scene,
okay,
the more
Hemingway.
description. What's that?
I said, okay, Hemingway.
But you start to set that description, and one thing, Mickie, that you mentioned before we started was that helps get you into it.
Absolutely. It helps me get into the mindset of the character, and it eases my transition into full immersion in the world, and that works for me, and I think it's partly due to my intro to D&D. I mean, I didn't grow up playing these games. I didn't grow up reading about these books.
I didn't grow up.
I didn't grow up, period. But we won't go there.
Right.
So it serves as a jumping off point for me to enter this fantasy world. And it helps because, I mean, I look at it, it's a movie in my head when I'm playing. And I picture all the characters, and there's scenery. We're in New Zealand going through.
Of course, it's always New Zealand.
It's always New Zealand.
It's so
you know, it's so picturesque.
Yeah.
That helps me. It helps me get into the mood of the character, helps me play better, I think. But of course, you can go down a rabbit hole and you get too descriptive, which, I mean, I have not gotten to a point where a DM has been too descriptive for my taste. Mm-hmm. So if I ever cross that bridge, I'll let you know.
Cool. One of the things that on that note, between what I just said, for example, and the starter set, I felt the starter set didn't give enough description to really tell you where you were, which is one of the reasons while we were playing that I actually put the maps where you guys could see them. And I think several of us owned the starter set, so we probably knew it anyway. But to get that map that shows the jagged area with the crevasse and what have you, it's so much easier than when the narrative of the area says there's a crevasse and it's 15 feet deep. Right? That doesn't really help, but at least they had a drawing there that could help paint that picture better.
I don't know. It could be painted. What do you think, James? Do you like a lot of description in your worlds? What about NPC description?
Okay, so I do my own world building in my head as well, and I tend to build my own world on my own terms. So when someone says something contrary to that, it actually pulls me out. So there is that. So the less description, the better in my case.
But then what happens when there's something that conflicts the picture that you have in your mind?
Unless it's incredibly story-oriented, it shouldn't come up.
So give me like kind of an example of that. Think of this is your world now. Mm-hmm. You have a building there. What is the building made of?
It is solid hewn stone.
So if I walk up to the building as the player, and I say, I go up to the building and I start pulling some of the wooden planks off of the wall, does that mess you up?
Yeah, because there's no wooden planks there.
Right. And how as part of that description, part of the world description, how do you prefer to handle that?
So you said as the player, I go up and do that. Yeah. I purposely step out of that mindset as a DM. That way I can always react to what the players are saying. But when I'm playing, I start building the world in my head. And like, that's one of the things that's always kind of thrown me off by the Dungeon World thing, because the Dungeon World is so malleable that when I have this world in my head, all of a sudden, Mickey's off doing whatever, and it's like, no, you can't do that.
To me, when we play Dungeon World, the world is always in black and white and in shades. I don't know why. D&D is in
It's a Technicolor.
It's just kind of, I don't know, kind of says something about me.
Panavision.
D&D is in Technicolor for me. I think Wizard of Oz, like full on bright colors.
Cool.
But when I play Dungeon World, it's always kind of grays and shades. It's nothing's colored in because it's so malleable. And you don't know what the other players are going to do. I mean, we had one where people were flipping all over the place. And I was like, okay, this is some Matrix shit going on. So in order to help me play, I have to keep that world kind of black and white and fuzzy. Whereas
that's interesting.
Yeah. D&D D&D, I don't know, it's just more tangible to me.
Yeah.
It's easier to step into. It's less fantastical. D&D's, oddly enough, less fantastical.
Possibly because it's been around so long, and because, I don't know, there's so many references to high fantasy.
Yeah, there are.
I guess that's also why it's so much more tangible to me, because I can easily relate it to, Wheel of Time.
Wheel of Time, you can King Arthur.
Yeah, King Arthur.
The medieval fantasy you can see easier.
Yes.
So some of that comes to then when the description happens, because you're familiar with a rule set, it's easier to fit that description into that. I think JJ, you said before, that box. You know what the box is.
Exactly.
And when you step out of it, it can be difficult. Well, and when that box is already defined in your book, and somebody describes something that fits the box, you now know how to color it to give it the right color that fits.
And like you said, like I just said, a medieval fantasy, that's so well fleshed out in our media, in our culture, that we understand, like the Knight's Tale and like all these other shows. We can mimic our actions based off of those things that we've seen, whereas, like, say, steampunk, for example, I haven't done a lot of research on it. All I've ever seen are costumes. I'm interested in it, but I don't know how I'm not huge into the Victorian era. So the miladies and, that sort of thing. Like,
you've definitely got to be more pompous.
Yeah, like I'm not certain how I should model my behavior in a steampunk setting, or even like I don't know, another world setting. Like I like my boxes, and I don't want other people to mess with them. I have them stacked nicely. Don't mess with them.
Where's my stapler?
I think at some point we'll go over that whole dungeon world idea, and I think I'd like to explain it more. And that we'll probably keep for a separate podcast because that'll go way off topic here. But let's take another step in. So we started our adventure, whether it be scripted or not. We have the amount of description that you want in the world, whether it be large or small, black and white color, and we're in there. All right, so we're in that adventure. It's going on. Things are going well. How important is it how your character is equipped, the specific armor you have, the weapons? So if that equipment is an important feature within that adventure, how important is it that that you have new equipment as you go through the adventure? So I start, for example, I'm the fighter, and at the beginning of the adventure, I've got a long sword and leather armor. But at the end of the adventure, I want to be decked out in full plate. I want the Vorpal sword of dragon slaying plus 20, and I'd better have a shield that has something awesome inscribed on it. How important is that when you go through a campaign? Mickie?
I think it's very important because, to me, it just adds, I want to say it lends more reality to the character. Uh-huh. I love when my character starts off with, a regular quarterstaff, and then along the way comes across this, ancient runed quarterstaff that's, +4 to hit. I love that. And it creates little treasures throughout the adventure for my character to find. It keeps me vested. It's not just about the team and the ultimate goal. There's also little cookies for my character to find along the way. So I think that it just makes it much more fun.
Do those pieces of equipment have to make your character better, or just being better in themselves, is that good enough? Like you talk about the regular stick to a runed staff. Does that runed staff have to have a +10 to be cool, or is it cool enough?
It's cool enough that it's this ancient rune staff that I got as a gift for saving some village from werewolves. It's like this ancient staff that was, part of a monument that was entombed with the hero of that village. And because I went in and saved them from these werewolves, they gifted this staff to me. How awesome is that?
And adds their story to yours.
Yeah. So, now the history of that town has my character's name attached to it, you said at the beginning. So, it makes it all super cool. Super cool. I'm out of adjectives.
Super cool.
And going back to the starting small, working your way up, I like the character progression of levels, and I like the character progression of gaining more powerful items. And I've always disliked starting a high level campaign and then just having the players go shopping through the book.
You start with 400,000 gold pieces.
What are you going to do with it?
What magic items do you want?
And that just seems so boring to me, because then you're going to be min-maxing your character. And I mean, min-maxing is all well and good, but I like it where, maybe you have something that doesn't quite work with your character, doesn't quite jive, but it still complements the overall thing. And because you started using it at level 4 and you kept using it through level 10, it's now integrated into your character, and you can't go without it, because that's what your character does. That's his niche. Yep. Or niche. I never knew. I swear I don't know which is it. Is it niche or niche?
My sister has 2 daughters, so I have 2 niches.
You have 2 niches.
Yes.
I think it's niche. I think
you can pronounce it either way. It depends on whether you want to pronounce it.
Either.
Like if you want to say grassy ass or gracias.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
So I would say a good example of what I think you just were mentioning there, JJ, relatively good example. Through our starter set, Sir Walter Moss had a family heirloom great axe. And even though he was presented with a +1 longsword and had opportunities to do something different, Mike felt it was within that character. If it says family heirloom on it, why would I drop that thing? So he ended up cleaving everything with the great axe right through the entire starter set, which I think plays into that point that his character, the player felt the character had an attachment to an item and therefore kept using it regardless of if it was the best item for the situation. But in that perspective, one thing, in talking about equipment, it's something, JJ, you brought up before, is as a GM, I want to make sure then, if that player has formed an attachment to that, let's not gimp the character just because they like the great axe. Let's make it a better great axe at level 5 and better again at level 10 and better again. So you grow it with them.
That's one of the things you've seen me do in one of my adventures where I crafted signature items to each of the characters to help them along the way. I think there was one point we were doing a campaign with Joe and we had no healer. And I made it so...
How typical is it to have a group with no healer?
Right?
For us, it's got
I know Joe at the time was playing the tank, so I gave him a way to generate temporary hit points from his weapon. He had to do a certain thing in order to generate them, but the option was there.
Yeah, it involved tap dancing and drinking, and it was... I did it all the time!
But I mean, that fits into the world, because if you have a character, take Thea, who is a monk, right? She starts at level 1 with her quarterstaff. It makes sense that as she evolves, she gets better with that particular item.
It becomes a 50-cent staff, then a 75-cent staff.
Yes. And then she figures out a way to carve special stuff into it. Meets a wizard along the way, kicks his ass, and then...
You press a button, 2 other staffs come out of it.
And now, in that same vein, and talking about the equipment, achieving that equipment, is that when does that feel right? Is it I found it in a treasure chest after I defeated the dragon? Does it have to be that epic? Maybe not have to be, but it's awesome when it is. I know, but. Can it just be that it was you were researching in the library, found that that runed staff that Thea has been wanting, that the legendary runed staff that all the monks talked about once upon a time in the library, you find that ancient tome, and maybe the wizard deciphers the runes in the ancient tome that tells you it's in a lake on the other side of town, and you go and find it. Is that enough?
That's pretty epic.
So it doesn't necessarily need to be after defeating the most awesome monster ever.
No, it doesn't. Like it's all about the story. Like at least with items and progression like that, because otherwise, when the next better thing comes on, there's no attachment to the item. Just chuck it out the window, sell it. Okay, here now I get a new thing. Woohoo!
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that. Like
it's kind of like in WoW. I put. Time after time after time, I raided until I finally got 2 of the legendary artifacts. And even though they have no place in the game anymore, they're still taking up space in my bank because I can't get rid of them.
That's cool. Yeah, and that brings up a good point, because to me, in a tabletop RPG, that's not something that happens. You don't necessarily, for example, most characters in most campaigns don't have a house. Mm-hmm. So if you happen to keep that quarterstaff you had at level 1 because it has sentimental value, you're either carrying it with you, probably with a handkerchief tied with all your belongings as the hobo, or it's just gone. Could that be a useful piece of an adventure to actually have a way to retain mementos for your character?
Yes. I think so.
How would that help?
It makes the character
immersion?
It makes the character, again, and I go back to it, it makes the character more real to me, because as the character progresses, there are experiences that shape the personality of that character. So it makes sense that she would keep, I say she, it makes sense that Noctra was one of my characters that I played.
I remember Noctra.
That Noctra would keep a
she
small token.
She kind of gave me the willies, by the way.
She gave a lot of people the willies. That she would keep a small, brooch from her hometown that was decimated by vampires. And, she would keep that throughout her lifetime because it reminds her of why she's on the path that she's on.
And why she went as far as she did.
And why she went as far as she did. Oh, I hope I get to play Noctra again.
We can always find a way to work.
So that's one of the things.
Yeah.
In the interest of world building, it also helps the DM when the players, give the DM a lot to work with. Like, that's one thing I love about Mickie is whenever we sit down to do a character building concept, I have this whole worksheet that I have, and then it's like, okay, so how does she grow up, and so on and so forth, and and it helps build a much more real character in her head. And that's why she's able to talk about these other people like they're separate personalities.
Because there are little slices of Mickie. Because I can't speak for everyone who plays D&D. This is how he taught me.
Really? You can't?
I know. Shocker.
Try it. Really. It's fun.
This is how This is how JJ taught me how to play D&D. And for me, in order to spend 4 hours playing an RPG, that character has to be real. Which means that character has to have a backstory. There needs to be motivation for why she does the things that she does.
So with that, when we talk about building that character, and this kind of goes back to that sidebar that I recorded with Kurt and Mike, in that we talked about the backstory. One of the things that we did talk about, as far as Joe is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, if you give me a backstory, that's going to show up in the game. There's no chance it won't. So if you don't want it to show up, if it's a secret, please don't tell me, because it's going to be there. The example that I give is a real world example, in that the Dungeon World game that I run on the Mondays/Tuesday nights that Mike is part of. One of the characters had written in that he made a deal with a demon to be able to become the druid in the Dungeon World game that we were running. But we went 3 months, and he never mentioned it. So one day, when the wizard happened to die, and he went to the Black Gates, which is the way it works in Dungeon World, when you're reduced to 0 hit points, you go talk to Death.
Oh, nice.
And Death can make a bargain with you. And Death made the bargain with this guy, with the wizard, and it was, look, the druid owes me a few souls. You go collect, and I'll let you go back to living. So I made the character bring forth the background, the backstory that he didn't bring up himself. So I'll do that. But part of that too is, as we're playing, every game session introduces more now backstory. As a new session happens, what happened last week is now history for your character. And I try to make sure that keeps coming up. Now, when you're playing in an adventure, how important is it that, so say in the first session, you help the merchant clear the rats out of the cellar? How important is it later on that comes back in some way or another?
I don't think it has to come back unless it somehow moves the story forward in a new way. I mean, because you come across so many people and adventures, I think it would get boring if you try to bring everything back. Mm-hmm. But if for some reason that connection that you made with that merchant is pivotal to the story, then it makes sense to bring it back.
So let's take the same example. So you've helped the merchant out, and now you've gone, I don't know, 10 sessions later in the game. You're several levels higher. You're more badass. Your badassery meter has gone up.
It's over 9,000.
Right. It has gone up several notches, and you go back to that town again, which you haven't visited in game terms, maybe a year, and that merchant has died. Does that matter to your character?
How did he die?
That's a good point. That question itself means it matters to your character, right?
Exactly, because if he died natural causes, okay, that's a shame. But if he died as a ramification of our actions, there's probably going to be some.
There's some reckoning.
We at one point cared about him. We will make sure that recollections, recompenses is distributed.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, you're right. It doesn't matter how small the backstory piece is. If you can tie it back in again and make it, that would be a very interesting thing, especially if it was like the first emotional attachment that we made to the world.
Right. When you finish that first one, sticking with the same example, you've helped, Merchant Millie. She had all these problems with the rats infesting her basement. You help her out, and at the end, she's so grateful, and she starts calling you by your first name. And it turns out the store she runs is one that has the best beef jerky in town. And
Mama Millie.
Exactly. So Millie's beef jerky is the best in town, and that's where you go every time you go to stock up. And a year goes by, you're going back to that same town, you're heroes of the world, or at least of the region, and Millie's dead, and you realize at that point, wow, that's someone we started with, someone we grew up with.
Mama Millie's gone.
Right.
I want to know who killed Mama Millie.
Exactly.
Or if she
or what. If she died of natural causes, that's one thing. But if something happened to her, I'm going to whoop some ass.
Whoop some ass. And so
we did say that would be explicit, right?
Exactly.
I don't know.
Sorry.
Ass is totally legal.
Ass.
Hey, you can say ass. You just can't say hole afterwards.
You can't say asshole?
No.
Oh, damn it.
Oh, that sucks.
They always bleep it out on the radio. They'll say ass bleep hole.
Ass bleep hole. Got me right in the ass bleep hole.
Oh, yeah. All right. Totally off topic now.
So with that, actually, I'll use that as a shoehorned segue into this next piece I want to mention, the last piece I have up on the screen here. But so Mother Millie died, right? Mama Millie, the beef jerky queen of the West, is now dead. And it turns out that somebody caused it. It wasn't natural causes. And you're the badass. So you want to go kick their ass. So that may be a pivotal point of what your character class does, maybe, is kick ass, right? As the monk, you walk into the room, asses
getting kicked.
Right. How important is it in an adventure that there are specific situations that only your character class can handle?
I'll let you start, James.
You want me to start? Okay. So as long as those elements don't become annoying. Because,
you mean like I can only do this, but only if I roll a 10, and I haven't rolled a 10 all freaking night. And
yeah, like you don't want to stymie the story based off a roll. But if you can have something extra happen, like the story's going to progress anyways, but the story will progress easier if someone can do a thing. That's okay. At the same time, when I was beginning DMing, I had a habit of, trapping everything. And it got to the point where, the rogue would go up to the door. Yeah. Okay, I check it for traps. All right. There, you don't see anything. All right. I peek inside the keyhole. Boom. You don't see anything. All right. I touch the doorknob lightly. You don't see anything. All right. Are the hinges on this side or that side? And it got to the, I made the realization that because I've been trapping everything and giving this rogue so much to do, they were now paranoid.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And so that's why I say don't overdo it. Make it so there was something extra. So, there's an extra piece of loot at the end of the thing because they were able to open that one treasure chest. It's not necessary.
So let me reframe it a little because I'm thinking the way that you're answering it isn't the way I intended it, but I like the answer regardless. My thought is...
Is your volume okay? Okay, never mind.
I freaking rock.
I noticed.
My thought in the question was, is it important for your character to be in the spotlight because of your skill set?
Yes.
And solely because of your skill set. So,
no.
for example, and this is my point. So, when that trap comes up, is it important that the rogue handles it, or is it just important that the trap is handled?
It's just important that the trap is handled.
Okay.
It's even better when the rogue handles it, because I'm self-centered. I like cookies, I like my character to do cool things. So when she can go in and disarm the trap and pick the unpickable lock, that's awesome. So
it is important then, by what you just said, what I would rephrase my question then, it is important then that your character is highlighted, but not that the story stops if your character fails.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
'Cause
if
it would-
there's a magic book out there and the wizard can't read it, then someone should still be able to pick it up and bring it back to town,
Yeah.
so a librarian can decipher it. Or
Correct.
I remember a combat, if you remember it, in Asheville. We were living in Asheville. And you were playing Theo, so one of the first really times you played high-level Theo, and you went flying off into the distance and disabled the trap that was causing an ice field
Yes.
around the whole combat. And it helped make the combat for the rest of the for the
combat
party easier. It wasn't necessary to disarm, but
No.
you took it upon yourself to go and disarm it.
Because elves ignore difficult terrain.
and it sounds like at that point, no other character or class in that party could have done that.
Eventually, they would have gotten there,
But not
would
with
have taken
the expediency. and
correct.
skill.
They would have taken a lot more damage, and because my character Theo is the badass that she is, she was able to go there, disarm it within a couple of rounds, and everybody, the rest of the party, was like, "Oh, that was awesome!" You know?
Yeah, so having those little extra cookies is cool. It definitely helps, like I said, build character.
So bringing highlights to the character, regardless of the class, something that character is special at, something that character feels a sense of pride or accomplishment at doing because they can do it. They're the good ones at it.
Yeah, and it's something that I like to do as a DM is like tailor each session to a different character. Like have a story arc for one character, and then the next story arc is for another character, and that way everyone shares the spotlight. That way it's not always on.
Yeah.
Like it also depends on the table too, because there was a table where Joe was part of, and there were some people that were very introverted and never really spoke.
Really? Yeah.
So, I could never draw them out of their shells, but Joe, being who he is, he's pretty badass. He's extrovert enough for all of us.
The funny part is I'm actually shy. When we get together and play, though, I am so pumped up from playing. And I mentioned this. And for anyone who's listening, if you haven't checked out the couple of videos we've got up on YouTube, go check them out because I don't sit still in my seat the whole time. And it's so much fun to watch.
Super pumped.
Yeah, I get excited watching myself playing a game. But I definitely agree with that. That whole point of trying to bring out the character from the player. Mm-hmm. And as far as when you're creating that adventure, going to the topic, when you're creating it and you're thinking of the people who are playing and the characters who are playing. So if maybe that introvert is a wizard, and that wizard has a specific familiar, and you can bring that familiar into the story, that may be a way to pull that player into the story as well. So things like that, I think, can definitely help when you're constructing your adventure for your specific players. Yeah,
like I remember there was one campaign I was running, and I was really, really proud of myself. It was very short-lived, but we started fairly high up, and like the one character, kamikaze to save everybody else. So then
I did that once.
Was it?
I didn't know I was going to kill myself, but I did it once.
But then the rest of the party, the next session, were like, okay, we need to go save this guy. We are going down to
the so that wasn't me.
fourth level of hell to save this guy. And they and so I was like, okay, wow.
Well, okay then.
I thought you were going to re-roll a new character. I didn't realize we were going to keep the same. Okay, let's do it. And like they took that from me, and I learned from that. Like, okay, so he forcibly took the spotlight on himself, and now let's keep it there. And let's rescue him. The story's now about him. And so, and then, when someone else steps into the spotlight, let's shift the story to them. But it depends on the strength of the characters and or the players actually, whether or not they're willing to step into that spotlight.
And not just step into the spotlight, but also, so I could imagine that player sat back for probably a session while everyone else went and saved his character. And he's just witnessing the story unfold because he probably had not much action in there. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to, as the person who is currently a prisoner in hell, the fourth plane of hell or whatever it may be, I'm not doing much. I'm probably sitting there completely bound, and I'm waiting for my fellow party members who have now taken it upon themselves to rescue me. So at the table, that player is probably saying, "Go, guys, go."
Actually,
guys, go,
I anticipated that, and he was incorporeal while the rest of the players were corporeal. So he was able to help where he could when they had to fight other incorporeal things.
Cool.
And there were certain switches that had to be pulled while only a dead person could pull because they had to reach through a wall to pull the switch to open the door and stuff like that. So like I included him where I could, so at least he wasn't sitting there fiddling with thumbs.
And you, JJ, just gave me something that I had not put up on here that I wish I had. Splitting the party. All right, so there are adventures written and adventures that I run, and I know JJ's run as well, where it is inevitable that the party gets split up. And how do you handle that? So, Mickie, from the player's perspective, what is that like when the party splits up at the table? What is it?
It's nerve-wracking. For me, it's nerve-wracking because, you've gotten used to your group of 4 or 5, and all of a sudden you've got to split up. What's going to happen? Will I see them again?
Ever.
Will I see them again ever? It's a little nerve-wracking because, I build attachments to characters. It adds a level of intrigue to a game, definitely, when you split the party and everyone kind of goes, or groups go in their separate ways, and now I have to, especially when it's early on in the game and you're not really certain of the intent or the intentions of the other person. Is this person really whom they have professed to be all this time, or are they going to stab me in the back now that everyone else is gone, Right. It could be really cool, but nerve-wracking at the same time. So I guess I don't really have an opinion yet.
If you had the opportunity to describe an adventure you liked, how would splitting the party work out? I'll try and set up what I mean here. As if Joe, as I were to create an adventure, and I know at some point in the adventure you guys are going to reach this spot, and only one of the player characters can fit through this little spot in the side of the mountain. And of course it's going to be the smallest one, right? And it's probably going to be the halfling that Mickey's playing.
Green bottle.
Right. So that the only way the adventure progresses right now, apparently, is for the smallest character to fit through this little spot. It's going to split them up. How important is it to get everyone back together as quickly as possible, as slowly as possible? From the player's perspective, say you're the one that gets through, so you're going to get all the spotlight for a little while. But how important is it to get back to the cohesiveness of the group?
I think it's very important to get back to the cohesiveness of the group, because otherwise you're just by yourself in this fantasy world and it becomes a bedtime story versus
I love that analogy. That's cool.
Versus an RPG.
What do you think, JJ?
One thing I've noticed, like because Mickey's always been in one of my games now that we've been together, and I've noticed that whenever I do split up the party, she becomes much more wary. Mm-hmm. So when she has her full party behind her, she's not afraid of being all uppity. But as soon as she gets all split off, she's like,
"So kick your ass."
Yeah, she's much more polite to the NPCs. Yes, we could probably do that. No, I don't want to barter. I'm okay with that price.
I'm okay with that price.
Like. When she's got the party backing her up, she's like, "No, 50 gold, that's it."
So she's got the whole party there, and she's like, "I'm gonna kick your ass." So
pretty much.
So she's there
alone, I just realized that Mickey's a thug. When she's got her crew behind her,
can you turn around so that I may kick your ass, please?
Pretty much, yeah.
That's cool. JJ, as GM or DM, how have you handled splitting the party up and getting them back together when it's a designed part of your adventure? Of course, the players are going to make it happen, whether you want it to or not. But when you intended it, like that example I gave, when you purposely split the party.
It was really interesting. The one party I was doing it with, they loved splitting up. Like they all loved doing their own thing, and we had these gigantic notebooks, and like say, I remember Carrie and Josh would go off and do something, and they'd write down what they were doing the entire time, and then they would hand it back to me when they came back to the table. And this is the conversation we had. This is how our story is progressing. And I'm like, okay, yeah. And then so, when the players want to send secret messages to each other, it's hard to as a DM keep the story going because they now have full control of the story. And you had to let them run its course before they, give it back to the DM to keep driving it. So it's kind of like, you guys are on a road trip and, ooh, there's the biggest ball of yarn ever. We got to go look at that. And so the story stops and, it now becomes, it's totally within the player's control. And as a DM, you just kind of have to sit back and let everything unfold and glean from whatever you can to, add into the story.
I like that point, and I would say that I am that GM that says, no, you can't have a private conversation. Well, and I know I have upset players with this. If you're passing a note from player A to player B, I want to see it. Because that may not fit what's actually happening. And it can become difficult, especially in a scripted adventure where you need to go from point A to point Z with all of the points in between. And the players start saying, you know what, we want to get to point, A and a half. And it's like, but that doesn't exist. But they've got this whole plan and they've worked it out and they've spent half an hour and it's like, all right, we're going to go talk to Mother Millie and we're going to convince her to make pork jerky instead of beef jerky. I'm like, but that doesn't exist anywhere. We
Mama's
can't.
gone.
Right. And she's dead for that matter. I mean, right. So one of the things that I've had is it's a standing rule at my tables that players don't pass secret notes without me seeing them.
Well, how about that one time where I passed you a secret note?
Oh, that's another one, right?
Is that one of those lessons you learned from?
Well, that's learning a player. So yes, I learned from it, but I learned at that point that player was incompatible with my life.
Fair enough.
It was incompatible with the way I wanted to play the game. It was a lot of interesting people conversation and not very much gameplay. So it made it kind of difficult. But I think when it comes to that, especially if you have a prepared adventure or you're running an adventure that may not even be prepared, when players start talking amongst each other, it's very important to make sure they include the person running the game.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what they're discussing may or may not even be applicable to what's happening.
This is true, but the difficulty for me is I am hard of hearing, and sitting at the end of the table, I can't always overhear what everyone's saying. Like I have to very intimately focus on someone's lips in order to read into what they're saying. So when it's in a group setting like that and there's multiple conversations going on, for the sake of the story, I want them to get it over with as soon as possible.
Yeah.
At the same time,
You guys have your fun and let's move on. Right?
exactly, like it's okay, yeah, you guys are doing your own story thing. I get that. But let's move on now.
And on that note, how is it? I mean, you've gotten headphones. We've been able to turn stuff up. You probably heard everything okay here.
Yeah, I'm good on this. This is very refreshing. It's almost like having hearing aids again.
Nice. We had turn the headphones up as much as you want.
Yeah, it is nice.
Which, of course, then helps to deteriorate the hearing even further. But yeah, I'm actually losing mine as well. But anyway, so we've covered a lot here. We've got a few minutes left. Is there anything that you guys want to add here? And again, a lot of this hopefully will help as we get into our Dungeon World game, where what you've voiced here will help me actually put things that you like into the adventure that we have.
I'd like to hear from the audience, like on some of these points. And also, I'd love if we could work it in to have a character building session together where you pull out your 100 questions on building a character and we'll go through that, because I find it a very enriching experience for building characters.
I've got a cool form like that too. I'd be curious how close it is, but some of that character building stuff is a lot of fun to do. Yeah, and I do like, as far as when we start our Dungeon World campaign, the first podcast will be character creation. It may only be an hour, and that kind of stifles it a little bit, but we'll have that as part of the release.
Yeah, like that's one of the things where I haven't decided what class I want to play for the next Dungeon World thing. So I haven't really I had to decide on a class, then I choose a personality. I can't choose a personality and then go for a class. It doesn't work for me like that.
No?
I work the other way around.
Okay.
So I had to choose a class and
another
build a
part about
personality
that
around
is
it.
Not just the personality, but think of the person you want to be. Is it the the uppity?
The personality that I want to play is the one I played back in 2002, and it was Octhacatocathy.
It's got to be something I can pronounce.
That sounds like Klingon to me, anyway.
And he ended up being called Strong Dawn.
All right. So you
Strong
played
Dawn.
that character.
That's
or at
your
least that
barbarian.
character name when we did the play test.
Mm-hmm.
So
I want to play somebody evil again, but not evil. Just kind of evil.
yeah, somebody who doesn't.
So Briesque.
That
Briesque.
Briesque was just conniving. I loved her. At the end, by the end, I loved her. She was just out for herself. Forget all y'all.
I'm stealing those rubies.
I'm stealing those emeralds.
And the ceiling collapses. That was an awesome end, I think. It would have been awesome if the ceiling had collapsed and killed everyone. That would have been perfect.
I would have looted the bodies and walked out.
Yeah. So, actually, let's end on that note. As far as an adventure, we have now played the Dungeons & Dragons starter set from start to finish, skipping all kinds of stuff that didn't make the podcast entertaining, but we played it all the way through. JJ, if you had to pick your favorite part that was part of the adventure, what would it be? Because I know my favorite part was the players, but as part of the adventure, I would pick something else.
When the first time we encountered a doppelganger, and he came in as the drow and flipped the switch underneath the bed, and I just immediately took off after him and started pinging him with freezing ray and slowing his movement speed. And then someone else chased out after me with me, and we just left the two other people in the room to deal with the ogre.
I think Kurt was the second one out there with Thor. Right?
And Bree was in there going, "What the fuck?"
Yeah.
Like that, I really, because that's exactly what was that? Like, as the erudite, inquisitive wizard, what was that? Go find out what that is. So,
Go gadget legs.
yeah, exactly. Like, it was Go Gadget.
So now, I'll expand on that behind the scenes. The part of the adventure that made that happen was it did say within the adventure, and this goes to the content and the creation of the adventure. It said that if things are going poorly, then this doppelganger, disguised as a drow, would grab the map and run. And that's what happened. So that was actually scripted into the adventure, and that caused that nice moment to happen, that memorable piece. Mickie, if you had to pick, because you do now.
My favorite part. I think when we came up on the red brands at the pub, and there was a couple of them.
Giant tap house.
Yeah, and there were a couple of them on the porch, and she started talking shit just right out the bat.
Again, the thug, Mickie the thug.
And
she's got her friends behind her.
I would say that was half of the memorabilia there was solely Mickie, because really when we approached as the table, when we approached that situation, you were like, I know Greg, he owes me money, I'm going to kill that motherfucker, right?
Yeah.
And it was like you injected that into the situation, which to me raised the level of involvement. Everybody else was like, wow, Bree knows this guy, it's going to be cool.
I'm going to kick his ass.
Right.
Now, the little one shot we just did where the headache thing, as a party, and if it had been a continuing story, having crew be the last one up and slaughter everyone, and then he shakes everyone else awake. I think that would add a lot to the character development there too, and then to the world development.
I would say at the end of that episode, if crew woke up anyone other than Saunders first, he'd have been in trouble, because he was the one that knocked out everyone else.
Yeah.
Saunders got beat up by the invisible stalker, but he was the only one crew didn't hit. And if he woke up Theo first,
Theo
would get his
that's
ass
what
handed to
walloped him.
That's what we're talking about, how
Right.
the encounters can help shape the characters themselves, which is why you want to start small and build up to.
Cool. And I'll say for my part, running as the dungeon master for the starter set, my favorite part, and I'm going to kind of weasel out of this a little bit because I'm not going to name a specific part, but it was the way that the players adapted to what was happening in the story. So as players, you guys, you rushed in after the goblins, and then we had to re-record, and it was like, oh, we need to be a lot more cautious with the goblins this time, right? Mm-hmm. And then we get to the goblin hideout, and Mike, as a player, says, I'm going to do this Crocodile Dundee thing on the wolves, and like that was a weird adaptation, and I'm naming the things that are actually in the adventure. So it's in the adventure. If somebody uses animal handling on these wolves, this happens. And then after getting through the wolves, there's a garbage chute. And everyone's like, we're going up the garbage chute. And this is one of the times to pick on Thea because, not Thea, Bree. Bree is like, I'm going right up there. It's like, no, you're not.
No, you're not.
No, you're not. So
banana peels.
As we went through, each of the players and characters kind of adapted to the changes in the actual adventure. And I thought that Wizards of the Coast did a decent job in making the adventure like that. So there were new things that came up each time. When we got to Wyvern Tor, and it specifically listed in the adventure that if somebody takes out the lone orc guard outside, this happens. This is good. Everyone gets a surprise round. And Bree says,
One
know
shot.
what? I see him. I'm going to take him out. And it just works that way.
And then, where she had been going first, I went first. I teleported up and blasted everyone out the window.
Right. You go to the Goblin Castle, the Cragmaw Castle, and Ferris goes in, like I had described it, he goes in and he blasts the goblin outline on the wall. And the goblins are just gone. And there's just outlines in the charred spots on the wall. The way the players and the characters adapted. And somebody had said it, I can't remember who used the words, but as you got into the Cragmaw Castle, it felt like it was a well-oiled machine at that point.
Yeah, it did. It felt like we were SEAL Team 6.
Yeah.
So we've been playing a while together. We evolved. You learn each other's quirks.
Mm-hmm. And that goes to what you said earlier, JJ, where it's the goblins, then the hobgoblins, and then the orcs. And that's really what that progression became as you ended up at that castle and then further on.
They know what they're doing when they put these games together.
They kind of do, don't
do.
they?
They should. They've been doing it since the 70s.
That's cool. So with that, I think we can finish up this Sidebar podcast about content and adventure creation. So that hopefully this can help anybody when you're putting together an adventure for your players, or if you are a player and you want more than what we've talked about here in an adventure, go ahead and find us at adventuresfromtheshed.com. You can also find us on the Google community. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're all over the place. We've soiled ourselves on the internet. And you can find us out there and leave us comments. If you've got anything else you'd like to add to this, please go ahead and do so. In the meantime, I think we're going to say...
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Enos.
We hope our ideas spark your imagination when creating adventures and developing your characters. Now that you've heard our views, share yours on our website, adventuresfromtheshed.com, and like us on Facebook. Thanks for joining us.
The preceding podcast was brought to you by Shedcast. You can find us online at adventuresfromtheshed.com.